The rain hammered against the windows of the recruitment center as Sarah Martinez sat in the waiting room, her hands trembling slightly as she filled out the paperwork. At 19, she looked even younger, her small frame and soft features making her appear more like a college freshman than someone seeking to join the elite forces. The other recruits glanced at her with barely concealed amusement, their whispered comments cutting through the air like knives. "Look at that little girl," one muscular young man snickered to his friend. "Probably thinks this is summer camp." Sarah kept her eyes down, focusing on the forms in front of her. She had heard it all before. At 5 feet 2 inches and barely 100 pounds, she had been underestimated her entire life. Teachers, classmates, even her own family had always seen her as fragile, delicate, someone who needed protection rather than someone capable of providing it. But they didn't know what she carried inside her heart. They didn't know about the nights she had spent training in secret, pushing her body beyond its limits in her grandfather's old barn. They didn't know about the promise she had made to herself, written in blood and tears on a piece of paper she kept hidden in her wallet. "Next," called the gruff sergeant behind the desk. Sarah stood up, her legs steady despite the nervous energy coursing through her veins. She approached the desk with her completed paperwork, meeting the sergeant's skeptical gaze with quiet determination. Sergeant Phillips looked her up and down, his weathered face creasing into a frown. He had processed hundreds of recruits over the years, and he could usually spot the ones who wouldn't make it past the first week of basic training. This tiny girl with her neat ponytail and innocent brown eyes seemed like she would break at the first harsh word. Sarah Elena Martinez, he read from her paperwork. Age 19. Education, high school graduate. He paused, looking at her again. "What makes you think you can handle military service, miss?" "I want to serve my country, sir," Sarah replied, her voice clear and steady. Phillips nearly rolled his eyes. He had heard that line 1,000 times before. "That's admirable, but military service isn't about wanting, recruit. It's about capability. It's about pushing yourself beyond what you think is possible and, then, pushing further." "I understand, sir." "Do you?" Phillips leaned back in his chair. "Because looking at you, I see someone who's probably never had to fight for anything in her life. Someone who's been coddled and protected. The military isn't a place for delicate flowers." The other recruits in the waiting area had gone quiet, all of them listening to the conversation. Sarah could feel their eyes on her, waiting to see if she would break down and cry, if she would prove their assumptions correct. Instead, she straightened her shoulders and looked Phillips directly in the eye. "With respect, sir, you don't know anything about my life or what I've had to fight for." Something in her tone made Phillips pause. There was steel beneath that soft voice, something harder than her appearance suggested. Still, he had a job to do, and that job included weeding out recruits who wouldn't survive the rigors of training. "All right then," he said, sliding a thick packet of papers across the desk. "These are the preliminary assessments. Physical fitness requirements, psychological evaluations, background checks. Complete these and return them by Friday if you're serious about this." Sarah picked up the packet, her hands steady. "Thank you, sir. I'll have them back to you by tomorrow." Phillips raised an eyebrow. "Tomorrow? Miss, that's 48 hours worth of testing and paperwork." "I understand, sir." As Sarah turned to leave, she heard one of the recruits behind her mutter, "She'll be back crying by tonight." His friends laughed quietly, the sound following her out into the rain. But Sarah didn't cry that night. Instead, she went home to the small apartment she shared with her grandmother and spread the papers out on the kitchen table. Her grandmother, Elena Martinez, looked at the documents with worried eyes. "Mija," she said softly, her accent thick with years of speaking Spanish at home. "Are you sure about this? The military, it's not a place for someone like you." Sarah looked up at her grandmother, this woman who had raised her since she was 7 years old, who had worked 3 jobs to put food on the table and keep a roof over their heads. Elena Martinez was barely 5 feet tall herself, but she had the strength of 10 women. She had fled an abusive marriage, raised 4 children on her own, and still found the energy to take in her granddaughter when Sarah's parents died in a car accident.
Abuela, Sarah said gently, someone like me is exactly who the military needs. Elena sighed, settling into the chair across from her granddaughter. Tell me why, Nija. Help me understand.
Sarah set down her pen and looked at her hands.
Do you remember what you told me when those boys at school were picking on me in middle school? I told you many things. You said that size doesn't matter when you have heart.
You said that sometimes the smallest people make the biggest difference because they have to work harder, fight smarter, and never give up.
Elena nodded slowly. I remember. Well, I want to make a difference, Abuela. I want to protect people the way you protected me. And, I think I can do things that bigger, stronger people can't do.
Elena reached across the table and took her granddaughter's hands. They were small hands, but they were calloused from years of secret training, strong from hours of push-ups and pull-ups and endless repetition of movements that most people couldn't even imagine. Then, you do this, Elena said firmly. You show them what the Martinez women are made of. Sarah worked through the night, completing every form, every assessment, every question with meticulous care. The physical fitness requirements seemed daunting on paper, but she had been preparing for this for years. The psychological evaluation asked probing questions about motivation, stress tolerance, and leadership potential. The background check would reveal a life of perfect grades, volunteer work, and a completely clean record. What it wouldn't reveal was the hours she spent in the gym at 4 a.m, pushing her body to its limits. It wouldn't show the martial arts training she had pursued in secret, or the weapons handling courses she had taken at a private facility an hour outside the city. It wouldn't capture the burning desire for justice that had driven her since she was old enough to understand that the world was full of people who preyed on the weak. By 6 a.m, Sarah had completed everything. She showered, dressed in her best clothes, and returned to the recruitment center before it even opened. Sergeant Phillips arrived to find her sitting calmly on the steps, the completed packet in her hands. "You've got to be kidding me," he muttered as he unlocked the door. "I told you I'd have it back today, sir." Phillips gestured for her to follow him inside. He settled behind his desk and began going through her paperwork, his expression growing more surprised with each page. Her test scores were exceptional. Her written responses showed intelligence, maturity, and a deep understanding of what military service entailed. "These scores," he said finally, looking up at her with new interest. "Are you sure you filled these out yourself?" "Yes, sir." "The physical requirements you marked, you're claiming you can meet all of these standards?" "I can exceed them, sir." Phillips studied her carefully. In his experience, recruits who made bold claims like that were usually compensating for insecurity. But there was something different about Sarah Martinez. She wasn't boasting or trying to impress him. She was simply stating facts. "We'll see about that," he said. "Report to the testing facility at 0600 tomorrow. Bring workout clothes and be prepared for a full day of evaluation." "Yes, sir." As Sarah left the recruitment center for the second time, she felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness. Tomorrow would be the first real test, the moment when she would have to prove that her years of preparation had been worthwhile. She spent the rest of the day visiting the places that had shaped her. She went to the community center where she had first learned to defend herself after a group of older kids had cornered her in an alley. She visited the library where she had read every book on military history, tactics, and leadership she could find. She stopped by the church where she and her grandmother prayed every Sunday, lighting a candle for her parents and asking for strength. That evening, as she laid out her workout clothes and prepared for bed, Sarah thought about the long journey that had brought her to this point. She remembered being 7 years old and helpless as social workers explained that her parents weren't coming home. She remembered the fear in her grandmother's eyes as she tried to figure out how to care for another child on her meager income. She remembered being 12 and watching a documentary about female soldiers, seeing women who proved that courage and skill mattered more than size. She remembered making a promise to herself that night, writing it down and hiding it away: "I will be strong enough to protect others the way no one was strong enough to protect my parents." But, most of all, she remembered her grandfather's old footlocker, the one her grandmother had finally shown her on her 18th birthday. Inside were medals, photographs, and documents from his service in Vietnam. There was also a letter, addressed to any of his descendants who might follow in his military footsteps. The letter talked about honor, duty, and the responsibility that came with serving others. But, at the end, there was something else. A symbol drawn in ink, accompanied by the words, "For those who earn the right to carry this mark, know that you carry the pride of our family and the hope of those who cannot protect themselves." Sarah had stared at that symbol for hours, memorizing every line and curve. She had researched it, trying to understand what it meant, but had found nothing in books or online. It remained a mystery, a puzzle piece from her grandfather's past that she couldn't solve. Now, as she drifted off to sleep, she touched the small pendant around her neck. It was a simple silver chain that had belonged to her mother, but Sarah had had the symbol from her grandfather's letter etched into a small charm that hung beside her mother's original pendant. She wore it every day, hidden beneath her clothes, a reminder of the legacy she carried and the promise she had made. Tomorrow would be the beginning of everything she had worked toward. Tomorrow, she would start proving that Sarah Elena Martinez was much more than anyone expected. The testing facility buzzed with nervous energy as dozens of recruits gathered in the pre-dawn darkness. Sarah arrived early, as was her habit, and found a quiet corner to stretch and prepare mentally for what lay ahead. She watched as other candidates filtered in, noting their confidence levels, their physical builds, and the way they carried themselves. Most of them were men, ranging from college athletes to former factory workers looking for a new direction. There were a few other women, but they were typically taller and more obviously athletic than Sarah. She could feel the stares and hear the whispered comments, but she had learned long ago to tune out the noise and focus on her own performance. Staff Sergeant Williams entered the gymnasium with the authority of someone who had seen hundreds of recruits come and go. He was a compact man with iron-gray hair and scars on his hands that spoke of real combat experience. His eyes swept the assembled group with practiced assessment. "Listen up, recruits," he barked, his voice carrying easily across the space. "Today you'll be tested on every aspect of physical and mental readiness for military service. Some of you will excel. Some of you will fail. Most of you will discover that you're not quite as ready as you thought you were." Sarah stood at attention with the others, her breathing calm and steady despite her racing heart. "We'll start with the basic physical fitness test," Williams continued. "Push-ups, sit-ups, and a timed run. From there, we'll move to obstacle courses, weapons familiarization, and stress scenarios. Anyone who wants to quit can leave now. No shame in recognizing your limitations early." A few recruits shifted uncomfortably, but no one left. Williams divided them into groups based on age and gender. Sarah found herself with 5 other young women, all of whom looked at her with a mixture of curiosity and concern. They seemed worried that her obvious inexperience might somehow reflect poorly on their group. "I'm Jennifer," said a tall blonde woman who looked like she could have been a college basketball player. "You sure you're in the right place?" "I'm Sarah, and yes, I'm sure. No offense, but you look like you should be trying out for cheerleading, not military service." Sarah smiled politely. "I get that a lot." The first test was push-ups. The minimum requirement for women in Sarah's age group was 17 push-ups in 2 minutes. As they got into position, Sarah could hear some of the male recruits making bets about how many she would manage before her arms gave out. "Begin," Williams commanded. Sarah dropped into her first push-up with perfect form, her body moving like a machine. Down, up, down, up. She had spent years perfecting her technique, learning to maximize efficiency and minimize wasted energy. While some of the other women struggled to maintain proper form as fatigue set in, Sarah's movements remained crisp and controlled. At the 2-minute mark, Williams called time. Jennifer had managed 23 push-ups, which was respectable. The other women in their group had scored between 15 and 28. "Martinez," Williams called out. "How many?" 62, sir." The gymnasium went quiet. Williams walked over and checked his counter, then looked at Sarah with new interest. 62 push-ups was impressive for anyone, but, for someone of Sarah's size, it was remarkable.
You sure about that count, recruit?
Yes, sir.
Did anyone else count Martinez's repetitions?
One of the male recruits who had been watching nearby raised his hand reluctantly. I counted 63, sir, but one looked like it might not have been deep enough.
Williams nodded. We'll go with 62. Outstanding work, Martinez.
The sit-up test produced similar results. While the minimum was 53 in 2 minutes, Sarah completed 91 with perfect form. The room was no longer filled with snickering and dismissive comments. Instead, there was a growing sense of respect and curiosity about this small woman who was quietly outperforming expectations. The timed run was where Sarah truly surprised everyone. The course was 2 miles through varied terrain, including hills, obstacles, and challenging turns. As they lined up at the starting line, Sarah could see doubt in the eyes of her fellow recruits. Running had always been about endurance and heart rather than size, but most people assumed that longer legs meant faster times.
Williams raised his hand and then dropped it. Go!
Sarah started at a pace that felt comfortable but purposeful. She had learned through years of training that races were won in the final third, not the first 100 yards. She let the larger recruits surge ahead while she focused on maintaining perfect form and steady breathing. By the half-mile mark, she had moved up from last place to the middle of the pack. Her breathing remained controlled while some of the early leaders were already showing signs of fatigue. She passed Jennifer, who was struggling with a stitch in her side, and several of the men who had started too fast. At the 1 mile mark, Sarah was in 5th place overall and showing no signs of slowing down. Her grandfather had taught her grandmother to run when they were young, and her grandmother had passed those lessons on to Sarah.
Run with your mind, not your ego, Elena would say during their early morning training sessions.
The body will follow where the mind leads. In the final half-mile, Sarah began to move through the leaders with surgical precision. She passed the college football player who had mocked her in the waiting room. She overtook 2 former track athletes who had underestimated the difficulty of the course. With 200 yards to go, only one runner remained ahead of her, a tall Marine veteran who was attempting to transition to a different branch of service. Sarah could see the finish line and feel the strength still reserves in her legs. She had run this distance thousands of times, but never with so much at stake. This was her chance to prove that years of sacrifice and preparation had been worthwhile. She pulled alongside the veteran with 50 yards to go. He glanced at her in surprise, probably wondering where this tiny woman had come from.
Sarah didn't look at him.
She looked straight ahead and found another gear she hadn't known she possessed. She crossed the finish line 3 steps ahead of him, her time of 12 minutes and 47 seconds beating the course record for women by more than 30 seconds. Williams was waiting at the finish with his stopwatch and an expression of genuine amazement.
Martinez, are you some kind of Olympic athlete?
No sir, Sarah gasped, finally, allowing herself to breathe hard now that the run was over.
Just someone who's been preparing for this for a long time.
The afternoon brought more challenges. The obstacle course tested agility, upper body strength, and problem-solving under pressure. Sarah attacked each obstacle with methodical precision, using technique and intelligence to overcome her size disadvantage. Where other recruits relied on brute force to scale walls or navigate barriers, Sarah found creative solutions that maximized leverage and efficiency.
During the weapons familiarization segment, Sarah's years of secret training became apparent.
She handled every firearm with confidence and competence, her shooting scores placing her in the top 5% of all recruits tested that year. When Williams asked where she had learned to shoot, she simply said, "Practice, sir." But it was during the stress scenarios that Sarah truly distinguished herself. The evaluators put recruits through simulated combat situations, emergency medical scenarios, and leadership challenges designed to reveal character under pressure. In one exercise, recruits were divided into teams and given a rescue mission with limited resources and time pressure. Sarah found herself leading a team of 4 larger male recruits who had initially dismissed her authority. Within minutes, her clear thinking and calm decision-making had won their respect and cooperation.
Martinez has natural leadership instincts, Williams wrote in his evaluation notes. Calm under pressure, thinks strategically, and commands respect through competence rather than intimidation.
As the day wore on, word spread through the facility about the small recruit who was dominating every test. Other instructors came to watch her performance, curious to see if the rumors were true.
Sarah remained focused on each task, unaware of the growing attention she was attracting.
The final test of the day was perhaps the most challenging, a scenario where recruits had to navigate a darkened building while locating and rescuing simulated hostages. The exercise tested everything they had learned about weapons handling, teamwork, decision-making, and performance under stress. Sarah entered the building with her team, her weapon ready and her senses alert. The scenario required them to clear rooms systematically while watching for booby traps and hostile targets. Her small size became an advantage as she moved through tight spaces and took positions that larger team members couldn't access. When they encountered the first hostiles, Sarah's shooting accuracy and quick thinking allowed her team to neutralize the threats without taking casualties. Her calm voice over the radio kept everyone coordinated and focused on the mission objectives. In the final room, they found the hostages guarded by a complex defensive setup. Sarah studied the situation for 30 seconds, then outlined a plan that used her team's various strengths to maximum advantage. The execution was flawless, and they completed the mission in record time with no friendly casualties.
As they emerged from the building, Williams was waiting with a clipboard and an expression Sarah couldn't quite read.
That was textbook tactics, Martinez.
Where did you learn to think like that?
Books, sir.
And practice. What kind of books?
Military history, combat tactics, leadership studies.
Anything I could find.
Williams nodded slowly.
The day's testing had revealed something extraordinary.
This young woman wasn't just physically capable, she had the mind of a natural tactician and the heart of a warrior. In his 20 years of evaluating recruits, he had rarely seen such a complete package in someone so young. As the recruits gathered for the final briefing of the day, the atmosphere had completely changed. The women who had initially worried about Sarah's presence now looked at her with admiration. The men who had made jokes at her expense were quiet and respectful. Everyone had witnessed something special. Williams addressed the group with his evaluation results. Most recruits had performed adequately, with a few standouts and a few who would need additional preparation before moving forward. When he came to Sarah's results, he paused.
Martinez, your performance today was exceptional across every category. Physical fitness scores in the top 1%.
Marksmanship scores that would qualify you for advanced training immediately.
Leadership evaluation that suggests potential for rapid advancement. I've never seen a more complete performance from a first-time recruit.
Sarah stood at attention, her heart pounding but her expression calm.
Thank you, sir. I'm recommending you for accelerated processing and specialized training opportunities. Are you interested in considering elite unit placement?
Yes, sir. As they were dismissed, Jennifer approached Sarah with a sheepish expression.
I owe you an apology.
I completely misjudged you.
No apology necessary, Sarah replied. People see what they expect to see. I'm used to it. How did you get so good at all this? I mean, where did you train? Sarah smiled slightly. Everywhere I could.
The goal was never to meet expectations. It was to exceed them so completely that no one would ever question whether I belonged. Walking back to her car in the fading light, Sarah felt a sense of satisfaction mixed with anticipation. Today had been about proving she could meet the basic requirements for military service. Tomorrow would begin the real journey toward becoming the soldier she had always dreamed of being. She touched the pendant at her throat, feeling the symbol her grandfather had left behind. She still didn't know what it meant, but she was beginning to suspect that her military service might eventually provide the answer. For now, it was enough to know that she had taken the first step toward honoring his legacy and fulfilling the promise she had made to herself so many years ago. 6 months later, Private Sarah Martinez stood in formation at Fort Bragg, her dress uniform crisp and her bearing confident.
Basic training had been everything she had expected and more. The physical challenges that broke other recruits had only pushed her to excel further. The mental pressure that caused some to quit had sharpened her focus and determination. She had graduated at the top of her class in every category, earning the respect of drill sergeants who had initially been skeptical of her abilities. More importantly, she had proven to herself that her years of preparation had been worthwhile. She was no longer the underestimated girl from the recruitment center, she was a United States Army soldier. But Sarah's ambitions extended far beyond basic training. During her final week at boot camp, she had submitted applications for specialized training programs that would challenge her even further. Special operations selection courses were notoriously difficult, with failure rates that often exceeded 90%. Most candidates were seasoned soldiers with years of experience. Sarah was 19 years old with 6 months of active duty. On paper, she was completely unqualified for what she was attempting. In reality, she had been preparing for these challenges her entire adult life. The selection process for special operations began before dawn on a humid September morning. 43 candidates from various military backgrounds assembled at a classified training facility, their faces grim with determination and nervousness. Sarah was the only woman in the group, a fact that drew immediate attention from both candidates and instructors. Master Sergeant David Black looked over the assembled candidates with the cold assessment of someone who had survived multiple combat deployments and trained hundreds of soldiers. At 6 feet 4 inches with shoulders like a linebacker, he was an intimidating presence who commanded immediate respect. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice carrying easily across the formation, "welcome to the most challenging few weeks of your military careers. Some of you think you're here because you're tough. Some of you think you're here because you're smart. Some of you think you're here because you're special." His eyes swept across the group, pausing briefly on Sarah before continuing. "By the time we're finished, most of you will discover that tough, smart, and special aren't enough. This selection process will test every aspect of your character, competence, and commitment. It will push you beyond what you think is possible and, then, push you further." Black gestured toward a table covered with various equipment and weapons. "Before we begin, does anyone have any questions about what they're getting themselves into?" One candidate, a stocky sergeant with multiple deployment ribbons, raised his hand. "Master Sergeant, what exactly are we being selected for?" Black smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "You'll find out if you earn the right to know." Next question. A tall lieutenant looked pointedly at Sarah before asking, "Are there different standards for different types of candidates?" The question was clearly directed at Sarah's presence, and she felt every eye in the formation turn toward her. Black's expression hardened as he understood the implication. "There are no different standards here, Lieutenant. There are only soldiers who can meet the requirements and soldiers who cannot. Gender, race, age, and background are irrelevant. Performance is the only thing that matters." Black's tone left no room for further discussion on the topic, but Sarah could feel the skepticism radiating from many of her fellow candidates. She had experienced this before during basic training, and she knew that words wouldn't change their minds. Only results would earn their respect. The first week consisted of physical and psychological evaluations that made basic training look like a warm-up exercise. Candidates were pushed through grueling fitness tests, complex problem-solving scenarios, and stress evaluations that revealed character under pressure. Sarah approached each challenge with the methodical preparation that had become her trademark. While other candidates relied on raw physical power or previous experience, she used intelligence and technique to maximize her efficiency. Her small size, which others saw as a disadvantage, allowed her to move quickly and conserve energy for critical moments. During a 20-mile ruck march through difficult terrain, Sarah maintained a pace that kept her in the top third of the group despite carrying the same weight as soldiers twice her size. Her technique was flawless, her navigation was precise, and her endurance seemed limitless. "How is she keeping up?" one candidate asked another as they watched Sarah move steadily up a steep hill. "I have no idea," came the reply. "She should have dropped out days ago." But Sarah hadn't just avoided dropping out, she was excelling. Her weapons scores were consistently perfect.
Her tactical knowledge impressed instructors who had decades of experience. Her leadership evaluations showed natural ability to inspire confidence and coordinate complex operations. By the end of the first week, 12 candidates had been eliminated. Some had failed physical requirements, others had struggled with the intellectual challenges, and a few had simply decided that the program wasn't for them. Sarah remained, quietly outperforming expectations while earning grudging respect from her fellow candidates. The second week introduced combat scenarios that tested everything they had learned about tactics, teamwork, and performance under pressure. Candidates were divided into small teams and given missions that required them to infiltrate enemy positions, gather intelligence, and execute complex operations with minimal resources. Sarah found herself leading a team of 3 male soldiers on a reconnaissance mission deep in hostile territory. The scenario required them to observe and report on enemy movements while avoiding detection for 72 hours.
Failure meant elimination from the program.
Her team initially questioned her authority, but Sarah's calm confidence and clear tactical thinking quickly won them over. She positioned them to maximize their observation capabilities while minimizing their exposure to detection. When enemy patrols came close to their position, her quick thinking and precise instructions kept them hidden.
On the second night of the mission, their position was compromised by an unexpected enemy sweep.
Sarah made a split-second decision to relocate, guiding her team through 2 miles of difficult terrain in complete darkness while avoiding multiple hostile patrols. Her navigation was perfect, her tactical decisions were sound, and her leadership kept the team focused and coordinated. When they reached their new observation post, one of her team members, a veteran sergeant with 8 years of experience, looked at her with new respect.
"Martinez, where did you learn to think like that? That movement through the valley was textbook special operations stuff."
"I read a lot of books," Sarah replied, scanning the horizon through her binoculars.
"Books don't teach you how to make decisions like that under pressure. You've got instincts that can't be learned."
Sarah didn't respond, but she felt a surge of confidence. These were exactly the kinds of scenarios she had visualized during her years of preparation. Every book she had read about military tactics, every hour she had spent studying historical battles, every training exercise she had imagined was paying off. The mission concluded successfully with detailed intelligence reports that impressed the evaluators. Sarah's team had not only avoided detection but had gathered information that exceeded the mission requirements.
When Master Sergeant Black reviewed their performance, he made notes that would later influence Sarah's final evaluation.
"Natural tactical mind," he wrote.
"Calm under pressure.
Commands respect through competence. Potential for advanced training." The third week brought the most challenging scenarios yet. Candidates faced situations designed to test their absolute limits, prolonged sleep deprivation, extreme physical demands, and moral dilemmas with no clear answers. The instructors were looking for soldiers who could maintain their effectiveness when everything around them was falling apart. Sarah approached these challenges with the same methodical preparation she brought to everything else. When other candidates began showing signs of stress and fatigue, she remained focused and alert. Her physical conditioning allowed her to function effectively with minimal sleep. Her mental discipline helped her make clear decisions even when exhaustion clouded her thinking. During a particularly difficult scenario, candidates were required to navigate a complex urban environment while carrying a simulated wounded teammate to a medical evacuation point. The course was designed to test physical endurance, tactical thinking, and team loyalty under extreme conditions. Sarah was paired with Marcus Thompson, a former college football player who outweighed her by more than 100 pounds. When the scenario began, Marcus was designated as the wounded soldier, and Sarah was responsible for getting him to safety while avoiding enemy forces and navigating obstacles.
"This is ridiculous," Marcus muttered as Sarah evaluated the situation. "How are you supposed to carry me anywhere?"
"I'm not going to carry you," Sarah replied calmly, studying the map and planning their route.
"We're going to work together to get both of us to the extraction point."
Using a combination of leverage, technique, and creative problem-solving, Sarah helped Marcus move through the course efficiently despite his simulated injuries. When they encountered obstacles that seemed impossible for someone of her size to overcome while assisting a larger person, she found solutions that surprised both Marcus and the observing instructors. At one point, they had to cross a simulated river while enemy forces searched the area. Sarah's plan involved using natural cover and careful timing to avoid detection while helping Marcus maintain his balance on slippery rocks. When they reached the other side without being spotted, Marcus looked at her with genuine admiration. "I don't know how you did that, but you just saved both our asses." "We saved each other," Sarah corrected. "That's how teams work." Their successful completion of the scenario was noted by the evaluation team, who were documenting examples of exceptional performance for later review. By the beginning of the fourth and final week, only 18 candidates remained from the original 43. The elimination rate was typical for special operations selection, but the survivors represented the best of the best from various military backgrounds. Sarah had not only survived but had distinguished herself as one of the top performers in the group. Her consistent excellence across all categories had earned the respect of both instructors and fellow candidates. More importantly, she had proven to herself that she belonged among the elite soldiers she had always aspired to join. The final week consisted of a comprehensive field exercise that would test everything they had learned over the previous 3 weeks. Candidates would be evaluated on their ability to plan and execute complex operations while dealing with changing conditions, limited resources, and constant pressure from opposing forces. Master Sergeant Black addressed the remaining candidates before the final exercise began. His evaluation of their progress had been positive, but he knew that the coming week would separate the truly exceptional from the merely competent. "You've all performed well to reach this point," he told them. "But this final exercise will test whether you have what it takes for the missions that matter. The scenarios you'll face are based on real operations conducted by real special operations soldiers in real combat zones." He paused, looking each candidate in the eye. "Some of you will excel. Some of you will fail. All of you will discover something about yourselves that you didn't know before." As they prepared for the final test, Sarah touched the pendant at her throat and thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. She was no longer the underestimated recruit who had walked into the recruitment center less than a year ago. She was a soldier who had earned her place among the best through dedication, intelligence, and an unwavering commitment to excellence. The final week would determine whether she had what it took to join the most elite units in the military. But, regardless of the outcome, she knew that she had already accomplished something remarkable. She had proven that determination and preparation could overcome any perceived limitation. As the sun set on the eve of the final exercise, Sarah made a promise to herself. Whatever challenges the next week brought, she would face them with the same courage and intelligence that had carried her this far. She would honor the memory of her parents, the sacrifices of her grandmother, and the legacy of her grandfather's military service. Most importantly, she would prove that Sarah Elena Martinez belonged among the warriors she had always dreamed of joining. The final exercise began at 0300 hours on a moonless Tuesday morning. The remaining 18 candidates were divided into 3 teams and given separate but interconnected missions that would test their ability to coordinate complex operations across multiple objectives. Each team would face different challenges, but their success would depend on seamless cooperation and communication. Sarah found herself selected as team leader for Alpha.